This episode, we are going to cover your relationship with your vet and how you can explain your decision to feed your pet, be it cat or dog, raw.
The Pet Health and Happiness podcast from Bella and Duke, keeping you at the cutting edge of pet nutrition, behavior, and health with expert interviews, mythbusters, and more to ensure your pet lives a long, happy, healthy life.
It's a great topic, and what we're trying to do here is empower you with a few facts, because not all vets yet are up to speed with the latest research, references, and resources that we have available on our website. And in that note, we have also compiled a list of vets around the country who are very pro-raw feeding. So, Dr. Brendan, this is a great one. So many people in our very friendly and welcoming Facebook group mention that their vet thinks that this or that or whichever ailment might be down to feeding raw. So they have problems swallowing the fact that people are feeding raw to their pet. It's over to you.
So, I mean, look, to forgive them tiny pieces, it's, almost ingrained into them from day one of going to university because of various sponsors. This is what you feed. You don't need to really concentrate on nutrition because you're here about the medicine. There's vets like myself that actually know that nutrition is the first step to health. It is the integral part that makes up, what we love about, our pets. And if we don't do the right thing by their nutrition, we won't get that first element right. And we will be continually revisiting vets for that sake of trying to correct the problems we've created. So I think once we get beyond them having that ingrained, I must say this because, I think what we then just need to do is open up to them and state the facts. Look, as with my own health, as with my child's health, I want to feed whole foods.
Yeah, and just to put a flag in the ground here, guys, far from vet bashing or or critiquing, this podcast is very much about empowering you to empower your vet. This is part of a bigger series. It's Relationships Month, and we want to help you facilitate a really positive relationship with your vet, which we believe is really possible. And on that note, we believe building a bridge with your vet rather than bashing them is really the way forward. So I echo Brendan's sentiments here. I find it very difficult to believe that anybody who goes to university for 7 years to look after animal health can be anything but an amazing person, including you, Brendan. So,
well, it's only 5, but we're all right.
Potato, potato.
Yeah, so, yeah, absolutely right. At the end of the day, they want to do what's best by your pets. They're in it for a reason, okay? And it is not a financial gain left, right, and centre they're thinking. It's just that there is so much else to think about that some of them don't think about nutrition. And it's the same in the medical field. There's many doctors that don't think about nutrition first, and they rely on people outside of the profession quite often to fill that gap, to help people with their nutrition.
What would be the top points that you would want to explain? I think the first one you've already mentioned is ultimately you would like to feed them whole natural foods. I'm going to throw into that as well is we see this as a generic thumb rule, is the less processed, the better.
Yeah, absolutely. And also biologically appropriate, because we've got to go into the fact that, their gut, their anatomy, is so different from a herbivore's gut. There's no length for fermenting and releasing some of the nutrients that you've got to think. We've got to look at biologically appropriate diets. And for those, they're going to gain, for the carnivores, to my left and right, we need to be thinking about the fact that they're designed to get all of those nutrient factors from the meats of the animals they prey upon. And all of that is in there if it's good, pasture reared, outdoor, extensive, you've got all of these factors that build to increasing the nutrient content of the meat. So we're looking to all of those factors to help build health. Now, the other things are, you will deteriorate the food if you start to process it. And that's when they have to add things back in. So we're taught at university about all of these additives to build up the nutrient content of the food to make it complete and balanced. And actually, what they're doing is actually replacing the detrimental harm they've done to the food in processing it by creating those extras.
100%. If you look at human foods, processed foods such as cereals, quite often they say they're fortified with vitamin B and other things. That's only because they're stripped out during the processing of them. Why? Because to try and eat them in their unprocessed form, they're actually quite toxic to your gut health. So I think two classic examples that we see in the pet universe are taurine and vitamin D. Taurine is very fragile. It's an essential amino acid for cats. It's not for dogs, or for most breeds of dogs, and it gets destroyed through heat and excess processing. That's just not relevant to highly unprocessed, fresh, raw, human grade premium meat.
Absolutely. And those are the things. We can preserve the nutrient content by not processing it. And that's people have to get their heads around that. So making a decision about your vet is always it's about a relationship, a conversation, and being able to communicate well with them. And whatever it's about, whether it's about food, or it's about how to medicate them, or it's about how to look after them, or the care, getting across what that relationship means to you, to your vet, will help them understand the methods that you want to use for treatment. Okay, whether that be avoiding excessive medications for worm and flea treatments, it may be to do with yes, the nutrient content, but when it comes to an infection, about taking some other process steps before you treat the diarrhea, rather than just diving in with full-on antibiotics, which most vets, to be honest, are trying to avoid now anyway. So it's about syncing up, getting in step what you want to happen and what your vet understands you want to happen. And, we need to overcome, some vociferous people that will use the minutest risk. I mean, we're talking minuscule, much less risk than crossing the road with your dog risk to your health and your pet's health, to try and say that you cannot feed a certain way, when actually they're masking the risks that there are in processed foods, and they're also not looking at the counter evidence. And just as with your survey you mentioned just then, Dogs Risk up in Helsinki did a great look at diets and raw food feeding, looking at I think it was 1,600 plus homes that were feeding. It was 90,000 years accumulated data, looking at everybody raw feeding from 100% down to they thought they were raw food feeding, but they were just giving junk out of the fridge that they couldn't eat themselves. And they looked at that whole range, and it was interesting to see the health benefits, not just to the pet, but to the families that were feeding greater than 50% raw to their pets. Not only that, they then isolated that it was more likely that your child going to nursery was going to bring home something that was going to risk your health far more than your pet eating raw. And that's eating raw as in waste human food from the fridge, because that's the group that had any disease was going to be in that group that actually was less than 25% raw fed. And actually a lot of it was food that was just scavenged from the owners didn't want to eat it themselves anymore.
Yeah, past its sell-by date. Now, you be thoroughly reassured that none of you listening to this podcast, if you're feeding Bella and Duke, are in that category anyway. It's all premium. It's all super tested. And as long as you take basic hygiene, I mean, literally basic hygiene measures, not only are you empowering your pet's health and radically improving the quality of its life, in my opinion, you will also be improving your own. Brendan, do we need to cover any more points on that? Other than, I seem to remember one of the things that does come up quite often is slight changes in blood results.
Absolutely. I was just going to bring that in there, that once you've laid down the ground rules of your relationship and just, with the vet and just saying this is what you want to be doing, I think there are some other things that we just need to be aware of. And you should always, just have a look at the blood parameters that may be taken. And this is a useful opportunity just to say to you guys, sometimes it's forgotten in the process of trying to get information on what's happening with your pet, that, if bloods are to be taken, in order to standardize bloods, please remember starved bloods, preferably for 12 hours, okay? But a morning sample as well. So that's easy because if they have their tea the night before, by the time the vets are open in the morning, it's unlikely that you can just miss breakfast and that's them starved effectively for their blood sample in the morning. And that's how to standardize what will happen with the blood parameters, okay? So if you've had bloods results given to you and there's elevations that they're worried about the kidneys or they're worried about the liver, please just take stock. Was that on a starved sample in the morning? Okay. That's the first
really
thing.
Good point. Thank you, Brendan.
After that, I think the big one is you will see in raw fed dogs, not because there's a problem with them being fed raw, but just because how the metabolism works and the products that are produced from using up protein and fats, that there will be some areas that are slightly elevated, okay?
Compared to processed food dogs.
Compared to processed foods, okay? Or cereal-based foods. So even if they're, if you're putting a lot of vegetables into the diet, because I've seen some chef diet, cooked food options that are being promoted out there as lower processed foods, but they are really pumping up to keep the cost down, the amount of vegetable matter. And that's not biologically appropriate. That's just making it cost effective for them selling you that diet. So you've got to remember, if you're feeding a biologically appropriate diet, and we've seen this, Hemapet ran a session of looking at samples that came into their lab, okay, about 4 or 5 years ago. And they saw that consistently there were slightly elevated levels of urea and creatinine within the bloods of those dogs fed raw. Now, that does not mean the kidneys were failing. And I see this in the practice. We will see them literally 1 or 2 points up, okay, either on the high end or slightly above, but not massively above the upper range of what we would consider normal for urea and creatinine within their bloods. And remember, to check the kidneys, lots of other backup information should be taken. So if you see those levels slightly raised, be double checking. They're checking some other parameters, SDMA, urine, protein, creatinine, these things. So look at a urine sample, look at further blood tests to confirm function of the kidneys. Look at the cell counts. If they're all within normal ranges, there's no reason to start jumping to massive treatments or fluids or, invasive levels of change to diets based on a slightly raised urea and creatinine alone.
Yeah, absolutely. Brendan, I think we've covered all of the points there. I think realistically, the net message is please foster a great relationship with your vet. They're going to be the person who looks after your pet. So ensure you've got a great relationship. Do tell them about your decision to feed raw. Be open about it and be open about how important it is to you. Brendan's raised some really good points today. You've opted for a whole food diet, one which is unprocessed, one which is naturally rich in nutrients, and one that's been safely handled and of the highest quality.
Great. And biologically appropriate.
Biologically appropriate. How could I have forgotten that one? You wouldn't pop over to the zoo and see them feeding hay to lions and meat to elephants. So let's feed some healthy raw meat to our cats and dogs.
Brilliant.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.